Okay, so first, before I can start anything, I want to acknowledge that we are living on stolen indigenous Oromo land, and it's actually important that we are meeting at the Richard Oaks Multicultural Center. How many people know who Richard Oaks was? Okay, some people know, not everybody knows. Richard Oaks was a student here, but he's also one of the people who led the attack on Alcatraz. And as a result, took over Alcatraz, which was a prison. Now it is no longer a prison. And at the time, they were criminalized, they were seen as, like unruly elements and so on. So, but now, we know that it was a few years ago when the indigenous mural was unveiled, and actually the mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, at the time, even came up with a proclamation, proclaiming that day as Richard Oaks Day. That's really huge, and the reason I say that is, well, first as a Palestinian, and I think it's a question of justice in general to acknowledge that we are also people's land, but also as a Palestinian, it's really also important to acknowledge how the reach of the Sector Colonial Project and where it is at and how we need to relate to it. I also think it's important to also, given this moment of history, that we are also agreeing to defend and advance ethnic studies and to stop university attacks and preserve the spaces that we have, which is very small spaces, by the way. We pride ourselves in being the only college, but actually it is the only college. I mean, emphasize the only, not emphasize the only college, and the present says independent and only. Like, is there a non-independent college, and what does that mean? It's not independent of the university, it's dependent on the university for its economic well-being and survival and so on. So all of that, think about all of them. So I think it's really important to think that in 1968 there were students who were criminalized, there are professors who were fired, there were people who were placed in prison. One of the people we know, at least from Muslim communities, was named, one guy named Khosoros. He was Iranian, and he was an Iranian activist. And he was arrested by the San Francisco State Police, according to people who were active at the time, and handed over to the Iranian Secret Service, the Shah Secret Service, who tortured him at the time. So people did make a lot of sacrifices. That's why we're here today. But then now Richard Oaks becomes a hero. There is a name, which is really good. It's an achievement for us. But then the university can now kind of celebrate the past. So this is one of the things that people always talk about. So like people who resisted in the past, everybody hails them and says wonderful and so on. But if you're resisting in the present, it's not allowed. You're a terrorist. But in the past, if you're dead, it's okay. Like people talk about all sorts of things about that. Oh, this was amazing, and they were so radical and so on. When you come to the present, it sort of like becomes, it's not allowed. We go into what is supposed to be very scripted, very careful, like speech and so on. So I think a couple of things to think about. I just want to share with you 3 things about AMED, the Arab Muslim and Diaspora Studies program. And because we're an academic program, we're an academic program of excellence, and we don't apologize for that. We are at university. We should be producing knowledge, and we stress very clear. It's very clear in the manner. It's not even a secret, and I'm not trying to kind of give you propaganda or something. We are about justice-centered knowledge. No ifs or buts about it. It's very clear. It's right there. It's out in the open. People have a problem with that. Their problem, not our problem. We're very clear about that. And this is the center of the minor, and it was passed. It was approved unanimously by the Senate. If you are interested in oral history, I can share with you that we had to remove a lot of stuff from the minor proposal in order for it to get passed. For instance, the attack against GUPS. In 2002, GUPS was sanctioned, and even though it was unfairly attacked by Zionist groups who came from outside campus and inside campus. I don't like to say inside and outside because that creates like an artificial separation. So it was attacked and it was sanctioned, and so we had to remove that. We had to remove Islamophobic incidents at San Francisco State. We had to the minor proposal turned from 13 pages to 7 for it to be approved, but it's approved now. So it's just like the Palestinian mural that we had to remove the 2 symbols, Hamdallah and the key. And if people don't know about that, we can have a discussion about it and talk a little bit about why the history. But Hamdallah now is very much present. Actually, if Hamdallah was on the mural, maybe we will not be talking about it. Hamdallah is a little, how many people don't know Hamdallah? It's the cartoon character, the Palestinian cartoon character of the boy who's barefoot, who's wearing torn up clothes, and he has his back. And Najib Ali, the Palestinian cartoonist, who was assassinated in 1987, we believe by the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, drew him, said that he is the conscious, so he will only turn back and face us when justice prevails. So of course he was killed. So the past president of the university used to say that he has nightmares. He has like psychological trauma. Maybe somebody with psychology can study this. And he sees the cartoon character. I mean, imagine a president of a major university is killed by a cartoon character. So we have to remove the cartoon character. But now Hamdallah is very much part of the story. I mean, the day of the mural, actually, what GUPS students did is that they came, they were all wearing t-shirts with Hamdallah on it. So it's kind of like, it was there. And he's very much present and so on. So sometimes even things that we are forced to remove sort of stay with us. This is the same with the minor. So we have the minor. Most of our courses are GE, upper division, lower division, in addition to being global perspective, social justice, and American ethnic and minority relations. We work very hard to make that happen because we want students from all over the university to take them. So you can take the courses, you can also pick up the minor, which is 15 credits, 2 required courses, and then 3 electives. And some of the electives, like the course some of you are taking now, is colonialism, imperialism, and resistance. I mean, these are the kind of courses which are, some of them are specific around Arab and Muslim community, but some of them are like broader about questions of justice in general, which we focus, of course, because I'm teaching and now I'm still teaching with me this course. So that, I just want to encourage you all to take the courses, number one, and also if you are debating whether you want to minor, consider minoring in AMED. We would really love to have more minors. It also gives us strength. The more we have, the more we can actually say now we have students. So like university campus like us now, we have 16 minors, or less than a year-old program. They can, of course they can, but it's very hard to do so. The other thing that I wanted to kind of like think about in this particular space, because this is a GUPS hosted space with other students who are part of the joint struggle in the same struggle for justice here, is that we had the Edward Said Scholarship. Actually yesterday was the deadline, and we will be announcing the winners next Friday. And the Said Scholarship is for people who have good in the academically, but also exemplify what Edward Said stood for. So it's about activism, social justice, and so on. And the last thing that I think we would really like your help with is we have an agreement, the first agreement that this university has with any university in Arab and Muslim communities, and that's with the Palestinian University and Najah in Nablus, which is one of the most spaces of resistance and activism. And we have it, it's signed, sealed, and delivered, but the university has not acted on it. They've been saying for a very long time they wanted it, we worked on it, we came with a proposal, we worked with our colleagues over there, we submitted it, it was approved by the university committee, we had to go through all the channels. It's signed. We still don't have the president visiting Palestine. But I mean, he visited Israel, but he hasn't visited Palestine. He says he was in Palestine, but he was paid by the Jewish Community Relations Council. That was sponsored. Like a lot of Zionists donated tons of money before he joined the university when he was really invested. Anyway, I would really like for us to implement this agreement. I would like for students to come and say, we want to go to Palestine. We want to go and interact with our colleagues. We want to have an exchange. And we should not, as students, have to pay for it. The university should be funding us from our student fees. I mean, nobody's even asking the university to come and pay for the salaries that they're not giving to the faculty. That's the struggle we're conducting. But it's from your fees, instead of like, all this religious effort, with all respect, people know how I feel. But anyway, they're spending so much money for so many like whining and dining and like other things that are not really that important. But so why don't the students here go and visit their counterparts in Palestine and interact with them, learn about what's going on, have students from Palestine come and visit and so on. So this is something that you can advocate around. Okay, so this is kind of like my, and then I would like just to make sure that you all come on Friday. We're having this concert, which some of you have heard me speak about. This is that we actually worked several months to put together. Every single artist here who are very well-known international artists, everybody is donating their time. They did not get paid a penny. They're not getting paid a penny. All the labor is volunteer labor, including this beautifully designed, postcard, the community. And we wanted to do it as a benefit to raise money so we can pay for the paper and the printing and the ink cartridges and so on. We have no budget. We have zero budget, by the way. It's not we have deficit. We don't have budget. Nothing, zero. Like we raise money in order for us to be able to buy ink cartridges and drums, and so on. So this is not the reality. So we wanted to raise money to be able to support the sports of the program. We were told we cannot do that because we have to say it's a university corporation that brought this program. I said, okay, so the university corporation, are they going to pay for it? No. Are they going to organize it? No. Are they going to advertise? No. Are they going to bring people? No. I said, so why should we say University Corporation? We're doing it in the mission, which is being gentrified. I mean, like, University Corporation and the mission saying, we said, no, we're not going to do it. They said, you can do a benefit. So we said, okay, we're going to do a concert. We're going to charge very little. And we, as usual, and this is kind of like something not from the university, but this is from our own days as an organizer, we always say, nobody will be turned away for lack of chance. So if you want to, you need to come, you would like to come and attend and participate, please feel free to come. Do not feel that there is the stigma about money, because I know that people in the United States always feel bad about not having money, as this is a character flaw. It's a flaw of the system, it's not of you. But anyway, so please come and join us, because we really and we want to celebrate the students who participated. And anyway, and we have other things. Okay, so I thought in order for me to talk about, there are several things that you've mentioned about the 101 linking it up. I figured I'd just mention like a few things, and if you want me to, I can talk from here to eternity. This is my life, and this is my activism, and this is my scholarship. So I'm kind of like day in and day out involved in it. So, you know, we have a course, a whole course, and some of my students are here, and you know that we finish the semester, we don't even finish all the material we want to talk about Palestine. And part of the challenge, the problem is, this is something that's part of my presentation now, is that how do we think about Palestine from a critical ethnic studies perspective? Because Palestine in the US gets constructed as part of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I think the whole question of Palestinian-Israeli is problematic. Constructing it as a conflict, political conflict, is problematic, because it's not really a conflict that two people can come, sit around the table, and this is the solution, sit around the table and do conflict resolution. And those of you, maybe this is very big in psychology, by the way. And there is a whole discipline called conflict analysis and resolution. So you analyze what the conflict is, and then you bring the warring parties together, the conflicting, not even warring. War doesn't get mentioned, somehow like this in the background. Bring them together so they can talk with each other, and then supposedly, if they just talk, everything will be okay. And historically, this has been an issue in the civil rights movement in the US. It has been an issue for the Palestinians. It has been issues. It's a very, very, very dominant hegemonic theme in the US, kind of like the way people think about things. It's kind of, let's just bring people together, let's just sit around the table. There's so much money that gets paid for all of these workshops, people talking together and so on. Some of it is good because the people who get the money are actually make something out of it. But the premise of it is that if we could just talk, as if we sit around and some, you know, like your old students, some of you have taken politics or political science or international affairs, and you know somebody named Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, who's a scholar in Germany, who's, by the way, very Zionist. And he's very big in sociology and political sociology. And he says that in a book called The Theory of Communicative Action, if we can just bring people together, people sit at the table and then they talk freely. And we argue that you don't actually come to the table from equal places. You never come to the table from equal places. You never sit at the table, even though you're sitting, I mean, like we're all sitting at the table, right? But definitely there is much more power invested in me than the students who are sitting around the table. So like non-acknowledgement of that, it invisibilizes the power and makes it impossible for us to address power relations and so on. So even if people come to the table, so when the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis come and sit at the same table, so what? They sit at the same table, but each one of them, the Israelis come with all the military power, the fourth largest army around the world, and the Palestinian comes because the Israelis allowed them, the bigger, largest army allowed them to come and sit at the table. So there is no power there. And then they say, oh, they're talking freely, they're supposed to be talking freely and so on. So there is a problem with this whole way of kind of just like sitting at the table and being equal. The other problem is the constructing it as a conflict, and many of us, I think majority of Palestinians believe, and this is part of the Palestinian resistance, anti-colonial narrative, is that this is not a conflict. This is really about settler colonialism. This is Israel's settler colonial regime. That's just like the US. What happened in the Americas when that guy got lost, you know, and then these parts of the world. It is really about settler colonialism, and it's different than classical colonialism in the sense that colonists in the classical colonialism go colonize. Then they have a country where they can go back to. Settler colonists don't want to leave. And if you think about it, I mean, if you think about the history of Algeria, Algeria is both colonial and settler colonial. Colonial in the sense that the French went and colonized, and the military can go back, and the government can go back, but there were settlers. French settlers, some people call them pieds noirs, and I have a problem with that because pieds noirs means black feet, which means people who don't wear shoes, which has racial connotations, so I don't like to, I don't want to, but I'm acknowledging that it's there in the literature. So they wanted to stay in Algeria. They wanted to make Algeria another France. They wanted, just like the settlers who went to South Africa, just like the Zionists who went to Palestine, just like the quote-unquote early colonists who came to this country and settled and conquisted it and the whole history. So you know all of this. So it is actually a real challenge to talk about Palestine from a critical ethnic studies perspective, because people always say Israeli-Palestinian. When I ask students, this didn't happen too much in this class, but generally students will say, I say, what do you think about this? They say, well, the US funding of Israel is true. United States is the largest funding of Israel. Israel gets about, what is it, 10 million, 15 million per day now? 10 million dollars a day, right? Every Israeli Jewish citizen gets about $1,500 a day from US tax money, every single day. That's why Israel has a very high standard of living. Of course, also within Israel there is a racial map and a class map and so on. But generally speaking, Israelis live much better than other people, than Palestinians who are mixed or Palestinians inside Israel, because of the funding and so on. It's true, that exists. There is a lot of US support for Israel and so on. But that's not the only thing we need to think about. We need to think about the parallels in terms of settler colonialism. And then there are other things that sort of drop in the process, so kind of like thinking about what are the groups, the racial map of the United States. People will say, okay, so then Palestinians are the blacks or the Israeli Arab Jews who come, Sephardic Jews who came from Andalusia before or came from Arab countries are the blacks. And it's also a very different, very different comparison. It doesn't really work because African Americans in this country were kidnapped from their own country and put into slavery. It's true that Arab Jews, for instance, in Iraq and in Yemen, the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, actually placed bombs in their neighborhoods, in their synagogues, so they would blow up and then they say, we don't want to live among other Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, and so on, we need to go to Israel. And one of my friends and very well-known scholar, Ella Shohar, Iraqi Jew, actually writes about this. Like a lot of her writing is about that, what happened. It is very different. It is, of course, the Arab Jews were forced to go to Israel. They did not really want to go first to immigrate to Palestine because they were living with other Arabs who were Muslims and Christians and so on. But it is not the same as African Americans. So even though Arab Jews came and created a group called Black Panthers, they actually were inspired by the Black Panther Party from the United States. The history, the other histories is very complicated, and I think flattening and collapsing things is very problematic. Okay, I'm not going to continue, we can have a discussion about that. So just to think, I would just want you to keep that in mind as we talk about it, is how do we approach Palestine in ethnic studies? Another big issue about dealing with Palestine here, which is really why I appreciate that you're doing this Palestine 101, is the ways in which we think about that it is between Palestinians and Jews. It's either Arabs and Jews and Palestinians and Jews. In itself, a misnomer. When you say Palestinian and Jews, you are saying Jews are either a religion or a national group, and there is Palestinians. Which Palestinians? Are they Muslims? Are they Christians? Are they atheists? We have a lot of Palestinians who are Marxists. Like the biggest organized group within the Palestinian movement historically has been leftists, Marxists, and that's where there is connection with the people in the Philippines and in Nicaragua and El Salvador and South Africa and other parts of the world. But so when you say Palestinian and Jew or Arab and Jew, first of all, you're making Jews are a nationality, which is there is a big debate and question about it, and I'm not going to get into it now, but there is a big debate in the Palestinian literature. Does Judaism, does Jewishness constitute nationality? Does it constitute ethnicity? Does it constitute a religion? And so on. And there is a big debate about that. That's a very big thing. If you want to discuss it, we can discuss it. But if I get into it now, we wouldn't have enough time. But but I want to kind of so that's one of the problems. The other thing is that it erases and invisibilizes what are the Palestinians? Religiously, what are they? And so on. Actually, after Israel was founded now, Israel creates categories for the Palestinians. When there is a Palestinian who is a citizen of Israel, there is nothing on their passport that says they're Palestinian or Arab. What you can be Muslim, you can be Druze, you can be Bedouin, but it's like you don't know what, and Bedouin is people where they live. And then that's a very, by the way, racist and very, the whole question of civilization and so on. So Bedouins are saying they're nomads because they will grow and they will be developed, and then they may move to cities, and then they become much more developed and advanced. So there's like this whole progress narrative that's embedded in it if you're studying like political economy or whatever. So there's all these classifications to say anything but to say Palestinian, not to mention Palestinians. But also the very construction of the conflict as Palestinian and Jewish, or Arab and Jew, in the US context becomes actually extremely problematic because it absorbs everybody else from responsibility. So then everyone else who's not Palestinian or who's not Arab and who's not Jewish, or sometimes they say Muslim and Jew. Of course, Palestinian Christians get erased too. If you do all of this stuff, it means that nobody else who pays taxes to the US or whose families pay taxes or they are involved or living in the US have nothing to do with it. We can just sit there and be spectators, say, oh, the Palestinians did something good, the Palestinians did something bad, they're terrorists, they should be involved in non-violence, they should be involved in this, they should be involved. Everybody's passing judgment, but it's like a peanut gallery. Everyone is sitting there watching. I mean, really, it becomes really a problem because it does not make people culpable and responsible and complicit. Because every single person who lives in the United States is complicit in the perpetuation of injustice against the Palestinians and against other people unless you do something about it. So it's a question, and I always say it kind of like, you are a very sophisticated crowd, but like if you talk to other people outside, you say, no, I don't believe. I said, well, look at somebody, you pass around and you see a woman being raped, or somebody being beaten up for the police. You decide at that moment what you want to do. You decide whether you're going to do something, bear witness, or maybe take your phone and take a picture or something, or walk away because you have a date, or you have dinner, or you have a show you want to watch on TV, you want to sleep, you want to study, whatever you want to do, you're going to work, you decide. People make rational decisions. This is kind of like one of the areas I deal with, this question of social movements, collective behavior. You make a decision, what you are going to do with yourself at that particular moment. So people can always say, oh, I really didn't know or something. Okay, fine. You didn't know that. You can tell me whatever you want, but deep down you know. You know every single time you're making a decision, what are you going to do when you see something wrong. So you can stand, or you can do something about it. You can bear witness, you can be more actively involved, start saying hands off, hands off, hands off, like the rest of the students did around the ethnic studies, for instance. We could just say, we don't care. If ethnic studies gets fixed, fine. If it doesn't get fixed, we'll go take other minors or majors or whatever, or something. Or we'll wait. You could just say that, or you could say, I'm going to be involved. You're going to say, I'm going to say something, maybe do something, say something. I'm not talking about the way Homeland Security does you, spy on you and other people. But I'm saying about people actually being involved in the communities around them, being part of because you are part of the community, whether you like it or not. We're all part of the communities. It's just a question of what do we do about it, right? So this is kind of like another question that I think is really important to think about that. So the other, I think, misnomer is always kind of like saying it is something out there. So the way Palestine gets constructed, and of course a lot of other things, and Arabs and Muslim communities, and even ethnic studies, is that, oh, this is only the concern of Arabs and Muslims, this is the concern of Palestinians, this is the concern of people of color, right? I mean, but doing so makes our communities our special interest. So they give us the College of Ethnic Studies because they're taking care of the colored people. No, they're not. You're actually doing this because everybody's going to learn. It's actually better for everyone to understand the histories of this country and become better people and do social change. To understand about Arab and Muslim communities is about confronting Arab bashing and Muslim bashing and actually being better people and refusing the policies of this government of Homeland Security, of criminalizing people, of the war on terror, which actually affects everybody. So like people used to think it's like always about something, and at the beginning of the undocumented movement, not way back, when it was started, there were some people, and some of my Latino colleagues were actually criticizing it. Some people would say, I'm a Christian. I am not a terrorist. The unwritten, the hidden subtext is that I am not a Muslim. I'm not this and this and this. It's changed because we all have construct struggles with each other and so on. So it's kind of like the same way that we as Palestinians get involved with each other and we challenge each other and we say we're all about justice. We're not just about Palestine. If somebody says Palestine is the only occupation, we say no, it's not the only occupation. It's not the last occupation. There are a lot of people who are occupied. Palestine is the last colony. That is not true. We're not the last colony. Palestine are the victims of the victims. That is not true because actually the people who victimize the Palestinians are not the survivors of the Holocaust. This is really important because a lot of people keep repeating that it is not the survivors of the Holocaust. The people who victimize the Palestinians is a Zionist movement, a very colonial, imperialist Zionist movement led by a man named Theodor Herzl, who was communicating with Cecil Rhodes, who set up Rhodesia in South Africa, right? And they were talking about colonizing both Southern Africa and Palestine. This is the Zionist movement. What happened is that the Zionist movement was trying to get so many Jews to immigrate to Palestine because of anti-Semitism and the pogroms in Russia and so on. They did not succeed because other people were proposing other solutions, other ways. There are some people were saying, for instance, Marx, if people know who Karl Marx is, he wrote a big essay called On the Jewish Question, and he says one of the ways to do it is for Jews to be fighting with other people around questions of racism and discrimination in their own societies, along with other people. And when you do that, when you are able to get rid of that, you actually can get rid of anti-Semitism. It's just like any other form of racism. There was a group in Russia called the Bunds. The Bunds were Russian, not Russian, Jewish Marxists, who were part of the Bolshevik Revolution. If anybody doesn't know, that's another history, but that's the October Revolution that was led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and changed the history of Tsarist Russia. They also thought that they should be part of the changes over there. But the Zionists said, no, the only way we are going to address the question of anti-Semitism is to go and colonize, find another place where we can set up a Jewish home. Okay, and at that time, the Zionist movement was offered by colonial powers, Uganda, Argentina first. But then the Zionist movement said, we cannot get to Uganda because how are we going to make connections? They were all European, European Ashkenaz. They said, we cannot make connections with Africans. How are we going to say we have African roots and so on? At that time, nobody was talking about Ethiopian Jews who were Jews and so on. And actually, Ethiopian Jews later on, when they were supposedly rescued by Israel, their Jewishness was questioned. They were asked to reconvert because they were not real Jews. So, I mean, it's the gift that keeps giving Zionism. So it's not just, it's equal opportunity oppressor and discrimination, just not against the Palestinians only. But that's what people don't know. They think it's only against the Palestinians. So the Zionists failed. They were unable to they were just trying all sorts of things. And if you know the history, and we read a lot of the stuff last semester, they really were trying, they had a slogan called Judaization of labor and land. Take over the land, Palestinian land. Some of it they bought from some very rich Lebanese families, but some of it they actually pushed Palestinians in the barrel of the gun. The majority was pushing Palestinians of the barrel of the gun to get them, to expel them, and that's why the key becomes really important. Because what happened is that Palestinians left. They locked their doors, and they thought they were going back. And they kept the keys with them. They left, some people left the food cooking, some people left the clothes, everybody, the clothes on the clothesline. I mean, they left everything behind, and they just took their families. Sometimes even they weren't even to take family members. Sometimes they had to leave behind, like older people who were really, really sick, and the older people said, just go save yourself, and so on. So some Palestinians were pushed at the barrel of the gun, and so on. That's why the key becomes really important, symbolic in Palestine, because almost 1 million Palestinians were displaced. And if you know the history, is that the way the Zionist movement did it is that, like with Palestinians living in the north of Palestine, they closed the west, they closed the east, they closed the south. So the only way they could go is to go towards Lebanon. The Palestinians who were living in the center of Palestine, they closed the north, the west, and the south, so they can go to Jordan. The Palestinians who were living in the southern part of Palestine, they closed the west, the north, and the east. So they can go, that's why a lot of Palestinians from the south of Palestine are in Gaza, refugees in Gaza now, because Gaza is southernmost state. So it's called the Dalit Plan. It's actually written by an Israeli scholar who was fired from his job, had to leave. His name is Ilan Pater, who's now teaches in England. And the book called Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. So this is like, these are, but all of these attempts that the Zionist movement tried to do, they did not succeed in getting a lot of Jews to go and immigrate to Palestine. I mean, everything, bribery, support, pushing them, whatever, placing bombs in their synagogues, it didn't work. But what they did is that once the Holocaust started happening, and the European countries and the United States closed the doors to Jewish refugees, and this is all documented, by the way. Some of it is documented in history, some of it now U.S. archives are being opened, for instance, about the president at the time. They closed the doors in the face of they limited how many Jews can immigrate to Europe and the US. And by the way, the Zionist movement was very much involved in that. And there are books, if you are interested, I can refer you to books, including like somebody named Lenny Brerer, a Jewish guy who's from New York. He actually wrote a book called The Iron Wall, talking about the collaboration between Nazism and the Zionist leaders. So they pushed, they made it impossible for Jews, refugees, to go to Europe or the US. Where would they go? If you are under the gun, if 6 million Jews are being burned in the Holocaust, where would you go? You will go the only place that will take you. I mean, you always seek refuge. People who come here undocumented, it's not because the US is their first choice. It's because the only place maybe they'll be able to go, they pay a coyote, and people will transport them to Arizona, and they have this lesson. I mean, it's a horrible situation, but you always try to find a place. And during the 80s, the people who were running away from the death squads in El Salvador, and Nicaragua, and Honduras, and Guatemala, where would they go? I mean, when people say, oh, they're coming here for the American dream, that's not really, I mean, this is kind of, they put a positive spin on it, but that's not what it is. People want to go wherever they can be safe with their families. So, when the Holocaust happens, the Zionist movement took advantage of it and said, and this is all documented, this is not something I'm claiming, that they basically, that was how they were able to get some Jews to go. And actually not a lot of Jews ended up going to Palestine, but that was a moment at which the Zionist movement was able to guilt trip the Europeans, for good reasons, the Europeans and the US government, in order to recognize Israel and support Israel. And basically, and until now, Germany still pays reparations to Israel for what happened during the Holocaust, right? The problem in all of this is not, it's a horrible tragedy. The problem is that it's coming at the expense of the Palestinians, who have never engaged in the Holocaust. Historically, there has been, fairly people who are living pluralistically together. People know the history of southern Spain, Andalusia, before 1492, before 1492, before Isabella and Ferdinand came to power, and they financed that man to go and get lost. And that's why they call it West Indies, because he thought he was going to the East Indies to compete with Britain to have access to India. I mean, this is why really, he got lost, okay? When they financed him in the Andalusia, there was a very well-known scholar. His name is Maimonides. And some of you who study philosophy will know. Ibn Maymun, he used to live in Cordoba. And then when the Rios Católicos, Ferdinand and Isabella came, and they basically were persecuting Muslims and Jews, they got rid of all the Muslims, and they also did the Inquisition. People may remember that. Where did Ibn Maymun go, Maimonides? The only place he could go and seek refuge was in Cairo. That's where he lived, that's where he thrived, that's what he wrote, that's where he died. So this is before. So when people say there is a historical, this is immemorial conflict between Arabs and Jews, it's not true. This is kind of like another spin in order to justify why Israel is being so aggressive, and to justify Arab bashing and Muslim bashing, and to justify the continued colonization of Palestine. Okay. The other thing is that they completely erase any presence of Christians in Palestine. I mean, even Jesus Christ is supposed to be blonde and blue-eyed, but now we know. The research around Christmas, this was like, okay. But people actually, but people actually, like, this is the whole thing, is kind of like, there are no Christians, they invisibilize the struggles of Christians in Palestine, and actually the participation of Christians in Palestine and the Palestinian movement. Yeah, some of you mentioned the factions, the Palestinian factions. Two very main Palestinian factions, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, were formed and led by Palestinian Christians. Dr. George Habash, George is not Palestinian, okay, and he was studied at the American University of Cairo. His family was a refugee, was expelled from Lid, which is a Palestinian city, and actually the general who conquered, the Zionist general, actually wrote about it, and they sent an apology to him, because this is like expelled from his home. He was the founder of the Arab National Movement, which was the main movement in the 50s, one of the main movements in the 50s, among Arabs and among not just Palestinians, and then after 67 became for the liberation of Palestine. If people are getting lost a little bit, this is the group that hijacked planes. This is the group from which they hijacked. So just to place things for that's
the dominance.
Yeah. And the other group is the Naif Hawat, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. He's not only Christian, but he's Christian and Jordanian. He's not Palestinian. Because historically the Palestinian movement was the place for Arab revolutionaries from Iran, people from Nicaragua, people from El Salvador, people from Japan. There were in when Layla Khaled hijacked the second plane, I think. She was with a man named Patricio Arguello. Patricio Arguello is Nicaraguan. He was killed, and we actually have the film, and I think we're going to show it for this class, for the 16th of March. And or we can make it available and have a discussion about it. And he was killed on the plane. And two things happened afterwards. One is that the PFLP, the group that was engaged in the hijacking, said that they are not going to release any of the hostages until Britain releases the body of Patricio Arguello, so he can have a dignified burial. And the whole dignified burial is very important. So historically, there have been like people who get buried, die because like just another piece of information. Israel, what they do, they have something called number cemetery. So they actually, until now, holding bodies, bones of Palestinian martyrs, like who died, who were killed 30, 40 years ago, refusing to give the bones to the body, to bury them. And like in Islam, especially if you're Muslim, it says, "Kramul mayyit dafnu," you honor the dead by burying them. So if you hold on to the bodies and you actually don't release the bodies, it's like it leaves like this continuous pain, dagger, like in the heart of the families and so on. So they have a number cemetery, they number the people, and they like every single time there is a hostage exchange or something, or like the Lebanese resistance, or somebody who holds like, or Sharif, the Palestinian who holds an Israeli soldier, they say we want to exchange, and then they release not only living people but also bodies, because they want to give them dignified burials. And recently, by the way, in this recent uprising, they've been refusing to release the bodies of young kids who get killed in demonstrations for 2 or 3 months, and now when they're releasing the bodies, they are refusing to allow the family to have autopsy. So the families are saying some of body organs are missing, because nobody can know if the bodies are intact or whatever. And there is an Israeli scholar who just came out, and she was working in one of the main autopsy, what is it called, the medical examiner's office, and she has a book out saying that her name is Weiss. She said that, there's a lot of bodies missing. We do not know where the parts are. The Israelis refuse to let Palestinians have autopsy, and they refuse to let them bury people in the middle of the day, because they don't want the demonstration to happen. So sometimes the price for giving the body to the Palestinian family to bury their dead is if they do it in midnight, if they do the burial in midnight, or if they don't do an autopsy. And this has been, by the way, if you watch the news, it's like all over the social media. This has been going on for a very long time, but now, because there is social media, we're hearing about it more and more and more. But to get back to it, so then Zionism was not really successful in recruiting, and this is why there are Jews in the US, there are Jews all over the world, because it cannot recruit. It doesn't work. It's a failed ideology. It's only an ideology that is supported by weapons. It's an ideology that's supported by oppression. It's an ideology that's supported by racism. And the United Nations Resolution 3379 that equates Zionism with racism is true. Even though when Reagan came to power in the US, he pushed in the UN and they repealed it. So it's like Zionism is not racism. Zionism is racism. And if you want to why? Not because I'm telling you that, not because I'm making a theoretical statement, go over all the practices. Israel has over 50 laws on the books that discriminate against Palestinians. I mean, until now, Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, Israel last year passed a law called nation-state law that defines Israel as a Jewish state. So if you're not Jewish, you're immediately second or third class citizen. I mean, immediately. And there is the law of return, the right of law of return. So any Jewish person from anywhere around the world, the minute they land in Tel Aviv airport, they can become Israeli citizens automatically. I will share something with you that happened to me today. My brother lives in Jerusalem, and he sent us today a WhatsApp message. He said, is anybody asking after me? He said, because they want to take away his Jerusalem ID, because Jerusalem, Israel, next Jerusalem in 1968, it's in all of Jerusalem, not only including the Aqsa Mosque and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, all Jerusalem is Israeli. And they keep expanding Jerusalem. So it's now no longer the small city, it's not the huge part of the West Bank is Israeli. So they want to reduce the number of the Palestinians now from 38% to 8%. How do you reduce the number? You either kill people, you expel them, you do something to them. So one of the things that they are doing, they take away the ID card of Palestinians who live in Jerusalem. So So my brother sends us today, says anybody is asking about him because he lives in Jerusalem. It turns out that they're asking, they called my other brother in Dubai. The Israelis called him to say, you know, who lives in this house and so on, because one of his daughters, my other brother in Dubai, lives in my other brother's house in Ramallah. So, and he lives in Jerusalem, so they already suspended his family reunification. And now his daughter is 19 years old, he's been married for 20 years. He applied over 20 years ago because his wife has a Jewish side. So this is one of the ways in which they are reducing the number. So the ethnic cleansing, which is a problem, I think, because when they say cleansing, it means not making it good. But this is what the part is very important. Ethnic cleansing, getting rid of Palestinian continues. It hasn't stopped. People think that it's only against Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. People think that the siege is only against Gaza, the blockade. People think that it is not actually happening in the West Bank. People think that there's actually a Palestinian state in the West Bank. That's not true. There is no such state. Israel can come every single night, and they do, and rape people, and arrest people, and take them, and blow up homes. Every single day it's happening. It's not on the media, and some of us actually get sick and tired of talking about it, because it's like, how many things we're going to say? And then you start talking to people, and people look like they don't believe you. So at one point you say, you know, the dignified thing to do is, I don't want to share. I really don't want to talk, because I don't have to convince you that I am oppressed, because it's actually not a proud thing to say, we're oppressed, you know? It's not. And then, if you want to talk, I'm against oppression because I'm resisting, that becomes terrorism, you get thrown in prison. Even if you say you support, not even engage in it. So it is actually a very, not complicated, I think, there is multi-layer to it, but it is straightforward, justice and injustice, but there is many layers. So this is about the whole question of people, when people say the victims of the victims. Not true. It was not the people who were victimized who victimized us. It was the Zionist, racist, imperialist, colonist, capitalists who oppressed the Palestinians, and the Holocaust survivors were actually victimized by the Zionist movement. And a few years ago, the Holocaust survivors actually have been protesting in Israel because they're not getting benefits. Israel always says, oh, Holocaust survivor, they have a whole museum and so on in order to get the whole world to guilt-trip the whole world about something that the Zionist movement actually collaborated in, right? So you use the tragedy of the Holocaust to do so in order to egg people and continue to guilt-trip European and rightly so, of course, they should be guilt-tripped. But it's at the expense of the Palestinians to kind of like basically deflect from what's happening about the Palestinians, not to address reality. Another thing that helps Israel today is since 9/11, 2001, when the bombings happened. Now Israel came and said, you see, the United States was just like you. We've been attacked too. And of course that rings a chord with people in the US who think that this is our great country. It's the land of milk and honey. It is the American dream. People say, I am a native San Franciscan. I say, what are you Iloni? If you're not Iloni, you're not a native San Franciscan. You're living here. You family came here at one point. But people have this kind of illusion about the Horatio Alger story that we actually come and we make it happen and so on. So Israel plays on this and says to the US, you're like us. You've been attacked the same way we've been attacked. So that's kind of, so like it builds. So actually after 9/11, 2001, the Palestinian president Yasser Arafat went to donate blood. Like other people wanted to donate blood for the victims, and the US refused to take blood from him. They refused to take his blood. Yeah, even they refused to take his blood, right? And they took the blood from Ariel Sharon, who was very well known. Everybody says Ariel Sharon in the Palestinian wing was the butcher of Lebanon, because he is actually, by Israeli commission, is well known that he participated in the butchering of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, which GUPS commemorates in September every year, because September 17. That's the Lebanon people who want to know what is the role of Israel in the Lebanon war and so on. I'm not going into all of this stuff because I think there is too many things to talk about. But I was going to say also what are the issues that are facing us today, because I want to stop and we can have a conversation. Okay, I'm more than happy, of course, to answer more, but I think people also have things they want to participate and respond and so on. So we have several issues today that we are dealing with. Aside, one of the things that Palestinian movement in general, actually, the majority of the Palestinians today, according to statistics that are supported by the Palestinian Authority, and you can say I don't support the Palestinian Authority, I'm against it. I think the Oslo Accord is a colonial structure that basically legitimized. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed an agreement at the White House law that was what do you call it, under the auspices of Clinton at the time, President Bill Clinton, they signed it, and it was supposed to usher a new place for Palestine and so on. What it did is basically legitimize the occupation and colonization of Palestinians. So what happened is that Palestinians, like every other community, we have our Uncle Toms, and we have our own people who collaborate with they basically sign now. So there is a legitimization for the Israeli occupation by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority and the Israeli occupation, they have something called security coordination. So there are joint patrols that if a Palestinian, let's say, goes and attacks Israel, or like throws a Molotov cocktail, or throws stones or something, or whatever, and Israel wants him, the Palestinian Authority coordinates with Israel to go and find that person. And as has happened, we have leaders in Palestine, either Palestinian Authority jails or Israeli jails that were handed over by the Palestinian Authority. It happens day in and day out. The PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the liberation movement, that's different from the Palestinian Authority that rules a little bit of a Swiss cheese in the West Bank, is actually made a decision that the PLO must stop all security coordination with Israel. But the people who are running the Palestinian Authority, this very little quasi-state, are very much invested in maintaining it because they became very rich afterwards. They all have big businesses. They control the Palestinian economy. Even it's worse now than it was even under direct classical Israeli occupation. It's even worse. It's much more dependent on the Israeli economy. People are unemployed. But if you go to Ramallah, which is the seat of Palestinian government, you will see that a cappuccino costs $5. A Palestinian family of 4 lives on less than $2 per day. So if a young kid can buy a cappuccino for $5, you can see the discrepancy in income. And we can also talk more about the whole question of neoliberal policies, the question of donor agencies, international agencies that say they're giving a lot of money to Palestine. But actually what they're doing is they're paying their own staff salaries in order to sit in Palestine and yet do more studies, feasibility studies, about why Palestine is falling. But we already know this process, like stop giving us, all of this, and in the process it corrupts Palestinian society, okay? So the Palestinian Authority is really nothing but a legitimizing, let's say, foreman. You know how in the slavery there was the foreman who was kind of like running the affairs of the masters and suppressing the slaves and so on. It's nothing but a foreman that basically legitimizes what Israel is doing. So the PLO actually asked for all security arrangements to end. It hasn't ended. Israel is taking more land, is building more what they call settlements, but it's all settlements, but actually on the West Bank. They're blowing up more bombs. Inside Israel, for Palestinian citizens of Israel, anytime a Palestinian asks for a permit to build a house, for instance, they don't give permits. Because they don't want people to stay. They basically want people to leave. So this is one of the ways to get people out. If they build the house, like let's say the family gets bigger, so they need to build the house. They build the house. There is actually an Israeli practice that goes up the house. The house blowing up costs about $100,000 or more because it covers the cost of the dogs, the helicopters, the Israeli police, the military that comes. Palestinians actually sometimes end up paying for the destruction of their own homes because it is cheaper than having, like paying the bill for the Israelis. So they say, okay, we'll blow our own home. Imagine, like you build the home, your family is living. So this continues every single day. And this is inside Israel. I'm not talking about even the occupied West Bank, and I'm not even talking about Gaza. There is an area in Palestine called Nakar, which is the south of Palestine, in which the Bedouins live. And since Israel was founded in 1948, they did something called siyaj, which is like they confine them in a very small area. And now what they have done, now there are 40 communities in the Nakar who are not allowed, not recognized communities, which means they have no running water, they have no sewage, they have no schools, they have no electricity, nothing. By the way, this area is right next to Dimona, which is the Israeli nuclear reactor. And we know that they have at least 200 nuclear weapons since Mordechai Benjamin, who was working there, an Israeli came out and spoke about it, but now he cannot, he's not allowed to speak, he's been in prison for a long time, and so on. The other issue that we're facing today is the issue of Palestinian prisoners. At least 4 Palestinians has been in prison in one day or another. So every single Palestinian you meet, somebody's going to tell you there is a prisoner who's been in prison or whatever. And the prisoners have been historically been conducting struggles on hunger strikes. And I don't know if any of you remember 3 years ago, 2013, from 2011 to 2013, there was a huge strike in Pelican Bay, which is here, maximum security prison in the US, where they put prisoners under maximum security. They can't see a soul for like 23 years or something like that. And so there was a hunger strike in that prison. There was a hunger strike in Guantanamo, where the US is holding people who have not been charged with anything, and they hold them, and they've been found innocent and so on, they keep holding them. And there was a hunger strike in Palestinian prisons. And the hunger strike battle is called the battle, معركة الأمعاء الخالية, the battle of empty intestines. And it's dignity, it's about dignity, that we're not going to eat and so on. Now the problem is the Israeli Supreme Court passed a law that they can force feed prisoners, despite themselves. And the Israeli Medical Association approved that. So Israeli doctors will actually go and force feed, not there are a lot of freedom of protest, obviously. And so this is the only weapon at this point that Palestinian prisoners can have. And one of the things that connects, for instance, the US and Palestine is that there is this company called G4S, which is a multinational company that has been privatizing prisons here in the US. By the way, it's all over the world. We saw it in Lebanon, we saw it in Dubai, it's in Tunisia, it's everywhere. And it's a huge multinational company that runs, privatizes the prisons where Palestinian prisoners are held. And of course, it's a private company. What does a corporation want to do? Make money, right? Because if you don't make money, you close business, you close shop. It's not a charitable, they don't do it for free. It's not volunteer labor like us. They do it in order to make money. So what they do is actually they're squeezing the prisoners. They're making the food worse. People cannot even send books and clothes to their children in prison. They have to buy everything through this. So we actually have a very big campaign with the Prison Solidarity Group here, movement in the US to stop G4S. We also have a very big campaign called Border Divestment Sanctions, and this came out, it was officially announced in 2005 by the Palestinian Civil Society, calling on people to boycott Israel, divest from companies that do business with Israel, and impose sanctions on Israel, because if you don't do that, Israel is going to continue doing what it wants. The only way those in power know, as you all know from your ethnic studies, that's the only way they listen. They do not listen if you talk to them nicely. They do not listen if you sit with them and have coffee. They buy you lunch, and they talk to you, and they smile at you, and they have more dialogue sessions, and then nothing happens. The only reason, by the way, the only reason we got the $200,000, even though it's last amount, is because there is many protests. More protests, the more we will get. In 68, we got lunch, so. I'm just saying. And the other thing in terms of Palestine, the history of Palestine is the 2 times only in the history of the Arab-Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in parentheses, that Israel withdrew was in 2000, Israel withdrew from south of Lebanon because the Lebanese resistance resisted and kicked their butts out of there. And they had to withdraw from the south of Lebanon. And then in 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza because also it was inopportune for them to stay. It was very costly for them to continue controlling Gaza. And then of course they imposed the black blockade. But when people stand up for their rights, when people stand up and say we're not going to accept this, the world listens. And today, the BDS movement, the Palestinian people are supporting. I mean, everywhere. It's like if you think in the US there isn't a whole lot of support, because this is the US. What support is there for any movement whatsoever? I mean, think about all the movements. What is happening? There is more kids being killed by the police. There is more destruction of communities. There are more people being sent to prison. There is more cuts in the educational system. There is cuts in the welfare. There's cuts everywhere, right? I mean, so it's not like unusual. What I want to say is we're not exceptional. Palestine is not exceptional. Palestine is part of this whole injustice, and Palestine is part of the struggle for justice. And that's something we need to remember. The last thing I want to share with you is not something that's been actually affecting us here in the community. That, and I will share that there is a member of our, a brother of one of our members of the community who was like a fighter in the 80s, was arrested by Israel, put in prison, went on a hunger strike. So he would, because they were like mistreating him. So then he almost died. They took him and they put him in a hospital. He got better in the hospital. When he got better, he walked away. Like, why would he go and hand himself surrender, right? Then he went from the West Bank, went to Gaza, then he went outside, and then he moved to Bulgaria, settled in Bulgaria, married a Palestinian woman with Bulgarian citizenship, and then in December, Israel said that they wanted him to be extradited from Bulgaria to Israel because Bulgaria and Israel have an extradition treaty on the premise that he's an escaped convict, that he's not a prisoner of war. We call all our prisoners prisoners of war because this is a war. Okay? And so if you say he's a criminal, he needs to be escaped convict and so on. And I realize there is a whole discussion about the prison movement, what's social prisoners versus political prisoners and so on. In the US there is a very big debate about that. I'm not the best person to talk about it, but we're very conscious of it and we're having all this discussion about that. Anyway, so now Israel asked for this extradition. Most people in the Palestinian movement said no, he should not. Because if he gives himself up, basically they're going to go and settle scores with all the people, the fighters from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You cannot do that. You need to hold the fort for everyone else, not just for yourself. So he went and sought refuge in the Palestinian embassy. Thursday night, Friday morning, the Israeli Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service Intelligence, the CIA, went inside and killed him, assassinated him. They are refusing to release the body. They're refusing to have the family, even his own brothers, see him. They are refusing to let the Palestinian Investigation Committee look at what's going on. A lot of us are actually holding the Palestinian Authority responsible because they did not provide security. Bulgaria lifted the security from around the embassy. They said all the embassies that haven't been attacked in 20 years were not going to have security around them. Very interesting coincidence that this one was refuge. And then the Bulgarian Prime Minister had just come back the day before from a visit to Israel and Palestine. And so and like we know, because really his sister is very close friend of ours, she lives in a little Bay Area. And everyone was saying like, okay, 4 years, the statute of limitation will stop, just hold the fort, stay there, read, do your PhD, do your MA, do whatever you want to do, you're sitting there like stay. So they went and killed him. And this goes in the history, and this is like the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of the time we all get demoralized and say, where is our leadership? And people say, like a lot of the Palestinians will say, where is your Mandela? Where is your this? Where is your that? Because they kill our leadership. When you think about the history of Contemporary, 2 weeks ago was the birthday of Huey Newton. You think about the 21 in New York, you think about the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, the Brown Beret, the Chicago moratorium. You think about the death squads in El Salvador, everywhere. Our leaders have been blocked from among us. Historically, Israel has had a very specific, they call it targeted killing, by the way, they have a name for it. And they have gone through Palestinian leaders, from people who are just intellectuals, like Hassan Kanafani. And by the way, Hamdallah in the mural had the pen in one of the hands, and because Hassan Kanafani was a very well-known writer, all his books, by the way, are translated into English, they're amazing. He should have won the Nobel Prize if the Nobel Prize was not so political. Wow, so we know that. But anyway, so he will say that Kalima al-Bundukuya. The pen is my pen is my sword, my pen is my gun, because the power of the words, the power. They killed him. They killed a whole bunch of people. Wherever we go to Beirut, we go visit the Martyrs Cemetery, and there's his grave there. There is the grave of all the people who were assassinated, and now this is another person. Historically, the leaders of the West Bank, anytime leadership emergent, whether in Gaza, wherever they go out market, the same way they do to the leaders of movements here. It takes a very long time to grow leadership. We all know that. It's much easier for somebody to go and just participate in a protest, right? And we know, because you guys are all negotiating now, how you're going to lead the struggle, what you're going to do, and so on. But I think that the movements that have born you, all of you, the movements that have born people in the 60s and the 70s will bear more people, will produce more people. We need to just not have each other back, work with each other, support each other, refuse to be pitted against each other, divide and conquer, and really continue to say that justice is indivisible. Palestine is winning all over the world. Even in the US, things are changing. Even in the US, the strongest place of support for Israel, things are changing. If the changes in the US, you know how the rest of the world is, right? And this is an indicative of what's happening around the world. And one of the reasons for it is because imperialist and colonialist powers have been so greedy and have been so vicious, is that they don't leave us a chance to breathe. I mean, the whole question of Greece, the question of Spain, the question of, the third world has been hurting for a very long time, but now it's going to all the European countries and the US and so on. Something is going to give. Something is going to give. People rise up and start fighting back. And I think we are in the right path. let people say their names.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or concerns?
I have a question. It's I know it's kind of maybe like a weird question, but in Jordan.
Questions in school.
In Jordan, right? I was raised in Jordan, and a lot of Jordanians have this animosity against Palestinians, whatever. But as a derogatory term, they would call Palestinians Belgikiya.
Oh, yeah.
So where did that come from?
Yeah,
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Belgians. And actually, we found this out recently in Lebanon. Somebody was telling us, who told us this? I think.
Yeah.
Somebody told us, one of the Palestinian leaders, he's like a writer, his name is Matur. And he said, you know why they call Palestinians Belgians? I said, I did not know that Palestinians are called Belgians in Jordan, but okay. And it's because there were some shoes, and they, like when Palestinians were killed, okay, back. Palestinian in 1948, Israel was formed. As a result, Palestinians were driven out of Palestine and became refugees. Not all the Arab countries and not all the Arab leaders were pro-Palestinian or not, like were really anti-colonial. The leadership of Jordan was actually colluding with the British colonialism and with the Zionists. They were led by a man named King Abdullah. Okay. And so what he did, he actually made alliances with the Zionist movement to contain the Palestinian movement. And the minute Israel was founded, he actually annexed the area of Palestine in the west. That's why it's called West Bank, because Jordan is called East Bank. So you have the Jordan River, you have East Bank and West Bank. That's why it's called West Bank. So then Palestinian movement after 1967 started growing. And there was a huge movement in Jordan that was allied with the Jordanian movement together, and they fought the Israelis. In March 21st, 1968, there was a huge battle between Israel, and there was a Palestinian resistance movement, just started growing there, and that's where they had people, fighters from all over the world coming to train in Palestinians. If you look at their cards, you'll see the pictures and so on, languages all over, and everything was going on. And so Israel attacked. Israel attacked in a little village called Karama. Karama means dignity, but it just so happened the name of the village, where Palestinian fighters were, and the Jordanians. They attacked and actually were defeated. They were pushed back. The Israeli army was pushed back, and the Palestinian Palestinian resistance, the Jordanian movement won. But when they were trying to find out the shoes, some of the shoes were Belgian, and that's what they call the Palestinians Belgian, because the fighters were wearing Belgian. They call them Belgikiya. But it's also a derogatory term, right? I mean, like in...
Wait, what do you mean they were trying to figure out the shoes?
They were like, they look the shoes of the fighters. So they're trying to see who's the fighter, who is this fighter, who's the fighter, that.
Oh.
And they saw, wherever they see Belgian shoes, they said these are the Palestinian, the Palestinian fighters. They called them in Belgikiya, which I actually did not like, really. We didn't know this until somebody said, Palestinians are called Belgian, like, really? And you know why they're called Belgians? And so they explained to us these things.
That's so confusing.
It's very bad, but it is derogatory, and it's okay. So the thing is that it is not by all the Jordanians,
Yes.
because as I mentioned, Naif Hawatme comes from a big Jordanian tribe, and so on. There have been a lot of Jordanians that fought. Well, when I am much older than all of you, and so I experienced 67. And when 67 occupation happens, so when it happened, the Jordanian, we actually thought, and this is where the collaboration of Arab governments, we thought that, the Israelis, they come from the West, the military. So when people came from the East, everybody went and shielded. We thought Arab armies are coming, and one of our neighbors, young man of our neighbors, he got shot and killed. And then after the occupation, of course, it turns out that Jordan sent orders to all his fighters to leave, but they didn't take everybody. On the roof of our building, there was a Jordanian soldier who kept fighting, and he died. He killed, and I remember, my father told me, go get the gun from him, and he was holding the gun like this. We needed to throw the guns in one place so Israel can come and collect them, otherwise they're going to blow up all the homes, and so on. And my dad and another guy from the neighborhood went and buried him in a mass grave. And then his father comes to visit, and he's Jordanian. Not Palestinian Jordanian, Jordanian. So it is not, and there is a lot of, and if you look at the history of the Palestinian movement, there's a lot of Arabs who have been involved in the movement. But there is this divide and conquer, and part of it has to do with the Jordanian regime's collaboration with Israel. It's just like when you think about, again, I'll bring something closer to people who history and knowledge, Central America. Honduras has been, very much connected with the U.S. They brought in all the U.S. forces. The militarization was in there. They used to, that's from there the U.S. goes and attacks the fighters in El Salvador and the Sandinista in Nicaragua, and they'll talk about Palestinization. The Guatemalan junta brought Ariel Sharon after 1982 to Palestinize the indigenous population because he participated in the extermination of Palestinians in Lebanon. He had experience. They brought him to get rid of the indigenous fighters. So, but this is very simple. Like, this is why I think it's really important to know history, because there are there are a lot of people from LFS, and I don't know how much you know, but Marcos and Israel were very much kind of collaborating all the time. There was security collaboration, there were joint maneuvers, kind of like, and we learned about that, and we were also involved in the movement against Marcos and against the militarization. But it's just like, it makes sense. I don't think we should be surprised. It makes sense. Oppressors come together. We need to, and we come together. They come together too. Of course, everybody comes together to protect their interests. So they have more power, but it doesn't always remain that way because we do have moments in history that we go through. Yes. Comments? I'm sure people have issues.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So why is there so much support from South America towards Palestine?
Why?
I feel like a lot of South American countries support Palestine more than most countries around the world.
It's different. It's now there is support. Because if you look at the votes of 1948 to recognize Israel, majority of South African countries voted. There were very
South
few.
America?
Yes, South American countries and African too.
Yeah.
Voted to recognize Israel because the U.S. was kind of like, pushing them under the gun. And then throughout the 80s, by the way, there was a lot of support for Israel. Like there is books and books and books written about the Israeli connection with El Salvador, the Israeli connection with Guatemala, with Honduras, Chile. Like really incredible. Big Argentina, Brazil, and so on. Then something happened in Latin America. There was a change in the juntas, like first Sandinistas won, the Salvadoran had a peace agreement and so on. So the military dictatorship started shrinking. First there was what they call democratic regimes, okay? And there was a very big issue because I think, like, for me, the thing that I remember the most is the question of memory. Because people in Brazil, for instance, people in Argentina, the separatists, thousands and thousands of people who disappeared. And like we know that some people may not know, if you're taking women's rights, ask mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, the women who went in the plaza, they pretended that all their children, not all their children, just to find out where did the bodies go. And then people disappeared, we still don't know where they are, right? So there was huge movements and so on, but there was a question about the memory. There was kind of a lot of people saying we don't want to remember. Either we don't want to remember, or the people who were in power, who committed all these atrocities, of course they don't want the memories to come, because they're going to be held accountable. In South Africa, they did truth and reconciliation, and we should write all the same truth. We're not ready for reconciliation. First, we need truth. We need to hold people accountable. Then it takes a very long time for us to forgive and forget, right? Maybe we'll never forget. Maybe we'll forget. So there was a lot of issues about that in Brazil, in particular, in Argentina, and so on. Then something happened in Latin America, and this is Jaime's area. He actually wrote an article about that, comparing. That there was a change in rules. Evo Morales comes to power. Chavez becomes president. You start like, of course, Cuba historically. It's been there, and it's been like a bone in the throat of the U.S. and crime protests and so on. So something happens. So all these leftist government come into power, and they, of course, historically they've been communist with the Palestinians. So like the current Brazilian student president was trained in the Palestinian camp, in Maputo she was, but she's not, right? But there's a lot of people who have these relationships, and a lot of people have direct contacts. So it is different, and it goes back and forth. Now I think it's not the same as it was before, because now Venezuela there's a change of rule and so on. I'm not giving you the floor because you're going to do this all things. I wrote an article called Tercer Mundo Otro Vez. Third word by another time, about comparing Arab and
Well, in Latin America, there is definitely a shift back, retreat. As you can see by the elections in December in Venezuela, where the right wing was able to win the elections for the first time. It's a decisive factor, and it remains to be seen exactly what's going to happen in Venezuela. More extreme is in Argentina, where extreme right-wing government has come into office and immediately began to reverse, has begun to reverse many of the progressive economic and social programs of the last decade. The last decade in Latin America was affected by a favorable balance in terms of world trade. Oil prices were extremely high. China, being an expanding, developing world factor in economy, gave Latin America some maneuvering space in terms of where to allocate and trade. At the same time, the U.S. empire shifted its eyes away from Latin America for a decade and shifted it to the Arab world, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, so forth, so on. So within that framework, Latin America was able to shift, and many of the governments started to take a more proactive foreign policy perspective, and also economically within their countries. Well, the crisis is much further. So now this is a long story, but I wanted to just maybe, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in here. I think when we think of Palestine, there's 2 things I would like to kind of sort of illustrate, and Professor Abdulhadi can expand on. The Palestinian reality, unfortunately, comes at a very momentous moment in history. If you think about it, 1948 was a very significant period of the last century. It brought about the expulsion of 1 million Palestinians, the creation of this entity called Israel. But it was also the period that was starting to bring about the decolonization process in the Arab and African world. Latin America was decolonized 200 years ago. But that was the period where we get into the decolonization, the independence in Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, many of the countries breaking away from formal colonialism, including in the Arab world. You have the development of Syria, Iraq, the Arab nationalist movement. But at the same time, there was this singular counter-revolutionary phenomena that occurred during that period, and that is the development of the expulsion of the Palestinians and the creation of Israel, backed by the U.S. and the UN. The UN at that time was promoting decolonization, was promoting the idea that the European powers did not continue to be directly in control of their former, and also it was also as a result of the defeat of World War II, where most of the European, both England and France, had been weakened, and then of course the subsequent the Vietnamese defeating the French, which shook the Arab world, and then we had subsequently the Algerian War liberation. All of these intertwining moments coincided with a singular period in history at the same, but there was one particular point in that dimension that was the other way, and that is the defeat and the Nakba of the Palestinians. And they have, they are the modern continuing reflection of the colonialization that was a very common feature of the 20th century and was supposed to have been eradicated by mid-20th century. It was supposed to have been, and of course we know that when we look at the deeper political aspects, none of these countries really reached formal independence, primarily because of the economic structure of world economy and the dominance of capitalist economic relations. None of the countries that became formally independent were able to really achieve all of their objectives, but the Palestinians were actually uprooted and not even recognized as a people and then subsequently as a nation. So I just want to throw those 2 things out.
Why?
Yeah.
Because when you came late.
I did because I had class when I
When
started.
you came late, but we talked about it before you came.
Well, hold on, who's there?
Part of the Palestinians,
Okay.
you're saying why the Palestinians, because the Palestinians were, the Palestinian, people say they were the victims of the victims, that the Palestinian tragedy came as a result of the Jewish tragedy. It's not true, but this is what the Zionist movement pushes, is that, you know, like if you're going to attack, are you going to attack Israel, you're going to again have another Holocaust and so on. It's not true, but we can have a discussion after we have come over it, but that's part of it. Also, the region itself is very important for the U.S. Strategically, it's like the Suez Canal, the connection between Africa and Asia, the oil in particular is really, really important. The other aspect that's not present today, which we didn't speak about, is at that point there was the Soviet Union, and the U.S. was here, so we have quote unquote the Cold War. And a lot of us say it wasn't really so cold. For a lot of us, it was very hot.
Yeah.
Maybe for the US and the Soviet Union it was cold because there was deterrence between the two. But the United States was against all liberation movements. It wasn't just against the Palestinians, against all of them. But basically they were always trying to say that if you, the Palestinian movement is the sort of like the advanced base for the Soviets in the region. So a lot of the times, anybody who is against the Soviet Union, anti-communist or whatever, was also against the Palestinians. So a lot of the things collaborated against the Palestinians. But I really believe the oil and the fact that the oil in particular made the U.S. very much intervening in the region. It was intervening everywhere, but that's really, really important. Kissinger, the former Secretary of State of the United States, was big time Zionist, used to say that the U.S. has two eyes in the region, Iran and Israel. In 1979, when the Iranian Revolution succeeded, and they got rid of the Shah regime, who was very, very big ally of Israel and the U.S. lost one eye. So it became even more important to be supportive of Israel. And more important because one of the things that we always argue is that, yes, we have a lot of horrible Arab regimes, Saudi Arabia, I mean, they name a whole country after a family. It's really horrible, right? So we have all these regimes that are really, really corrupt, horrible, brutal, and so on. But these regimes can change. But Israel, its very organic existence is such a colonial regime. So it's not about changing a government in Israel, from right wing to like more centrist or whatever that changes things. That's not going to change things. The whole setup of Israel, you have to design as the whole thing in order to change something. So Israel is a much more reliable ally of the U.S. Historically, people used to argue, is the Israel a junior partner? And this is a debate that happens a lot, in especially in the imperial circles. Is Israel a junior partner of the U.S. or Israel only a lackey of the U.S., that only a puppet? That's what the U.S. Says. Some of us always argue that it's a junior partner. It's not actually just a puppet. The U.S. doesn't tell Israel do and Israel does. The U.S. says to Saudi Arabia do and Saudi Arabia does. Okay, even though Saudi Arabia is much more proactive now in its policies and attacks against Yemen and so on. But with Israel, Israel has even moved to less of a senior partner. It doesn't have the same strength as the U.S., but Israel actually is very powerful now. It's very, very powerful. It's very much, we have a colleague in Stanford, his name is Joel Banian, who's Jewish, who actually is Israeli. He wrote an article a few years ago called The Israelization of U.S. Foreign Policy. And it is something, but it is a debatable because I think but then you get into the slippery slope where people start saying, oh, the U.S. media is only because of Jewish media, so that's not true. That's not true. They have interests, they have corporations, it is in their interest. There is something about military industries, Israeli military industries, for instance, need to have a war every 4 or 5 years, because if they don't have a war, they cannot advertise their weapons and tanks and planes as specific battle. They cannot sell them. Somebody else is going to go buy those weapons, okay? Something very interesting for you to keep in mind and keep things in perspective. After the Soviet Union fell in 1898 and the Berlin Wall, 1989, Berlin Wall fell apart and the Soviet Union socialist countries fell apart, people in the US started talking about something called peace dividend. People saying, okay, so the US always used to say we need all these stockpiles of weapons and Pershing and cruise missiles and this missiles and that missiles in order to deter the Soviet Union. A lot of people didn't buy it. It was like the whole Russian is coming and so on, is a scare. You know, that it's just like to scare people and scare them into submission, which is exactly like the war in terror is doing today. Very similar what the war in terror is doing today, and the McCarthyism in the 50s, right? Okay. Okay, so then there is no more Soviet Union. Why do they need to, I mean, really there was discussions in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal on the front pages that there is no need to do that. Boeing and Pershing and all of them were actually getting quite worried. And all of a sudden we have new wars happening. The United States ambassador in Iraq encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait. Yes, Kuwait has been horrible towards Iraq, but you don't go by invading another country. That's not the way you do it. There are different ways to settle disputes and so on. The United States encourages Iraq to attack Iran in 1980, right after the Iranian Revolution succeeded, encourages them to go attack. And they start talking about Sunni Shia, which is something that we actually have not, that's not what we talk about in the region. And who benefits? This is the question always. Who profits at the end of the day? Who profits? Israel, of course, profits big time, because when you start talking about religious differences and so on, Israel said, see, they're like everybody else. This is the way the region is. The region is what is it called? A swamp. And then we say, in the Middle East, when anybody you hear them say, in the Middle East, you know they're going to exceptionalize. They're going to say something exceptional. It's like, unlike anyone else, this region doesn't progress, doesn't advance, there is deficit among Arabs and so on. So Israel benefits as a result of that, and the US benefits as a result of that. So nobody's talking about the exploitation of oil. Nobody, yes, Gaddafi was a horrible leader. He was horrible, he was a dictator. But who is there now? All the US oil company, all European oil company, sucking out the life and the raw material from the Libyan people. So I think it's really important to keep things in perspective and also to have a complex analysis, not just everybody who's an enemy of the US is supposedly a good person. I mean, they could be bad people, but that doesn't justify US intervention, doesn't justify Israeli aggression. If I can not check.
Yes, thank you so much.
Also,
She's the moderator, I'm not.
Oh.
Then ask her.
it's also to historicize. The 20th century was a century of colonialism. And, in 1884, 1885, there was the Berlin Conference in Germany. 1884, 1885. Another conference, 1884, 1885, there was a conference in Berlin in which the European powers formally divided the world. France was supposed to get this part, England gets this part, Portugal gets that part. They divided the world. And this is where, in the Arab world, for example, where countries were created artificially.
1884, 85.
Yes. where countries were created artificially. Before that, the Arab world was a united entity in many ways of no set boundaries and no absolute identities. It was an Arab world. It flowed. There was commerce, there was exchange. There was no rigid formations that defined one as opposed to the other. But the European powers said, okay, this will be our part, French part. This will be the British. The same thing in Africa. All of the continent of Africa is an artificial creation, the boundaries, the borders. With it came the subsequent sense of identity, language, conflict, exploitation, division of tribes, and the same thing in the Arab world. This leads to the question of 48 in the UN. The UN partition was a decision made by the world bodies, but the one party that wasn't consulted was the native indigenous people who were living in Palestine. They weren't consulted. They weren't consulted in terms of, was this a fair deal? Are you willing to accept this two-state solution? In terms of how much land goes to this part and how much land goes to that part. There was no consultation. And then, of course, the Zionist political movement never actually accepted the actual terms of the two-state solution. They wanted the whole pie. And they went and militarily took over all of what they were not supposed to get, and they made a of facts on the ground which continues today. Now, from the point of view of the Palestinians, maybe Professor Abdulhadi can talk about the development of the Palestinians in the development of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and stuff like that.
So, I just want to add a couple of things about the colonialism, that actually the whole artificial borders is that the British and the French actually encouraged the Arabs, and one Arab leader in Mecca at the time, Sharif Hussein, they encouraged him to go and protest against the Ottoman Empire. Turkey was actually controlling the whole Arab world because the Ottoman Empire was one of Muslim empires, as many empires, was like the last Muslim empire. They encouraged him to rise against the Ottoman Empire, and they told him, if you rise, we're going to appoint your sons as kings in Jordan and in Syria, in Damascus and in Baghdad. Not wasn't Jordan and Syria, it was Damascus and Baghdad, the two capitals. And if we do, we'll do that. So he went and he supposedly had the first Arab revolution, Anyway, and so he went and he fought with the British. His forces fought with the British, and thinking that this is going to lead to Arab independence. In 1917, remember I mentioned that there was the October Revolution that in Russia that was led by Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution and so on against the Tsar in Russia. And Lenin said at that time that we are going to release all the secret treaties that in the Tsar's safe. We're going to open. They opened the secret service, and the European powers were saying, don't open them, please keep them secret. They said, no, we're not. They stopped the Russian-Japanese war at that time. There were a lot of things that they stopped, right? Because it wasn't in the interest of the people. And they opened it, and one of the agreements they found is an agreement called Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1960. Sykes was the foreign minister of Britain, or Secretary of State. Picot was the foreign minister of France. And they had basically carved the region of Europe. This goes to France, colonial power, this goes to England, this goes to France. And so that's when the Palestinians found out that they were like done in. They were, the colonial powers had already agreed in that. The other part of the other, fast forward, Muhammad asked about Jordan, that when the Palestinian movement was in Jordan and became very strong, the Jordanian regime, the Jordanian monarchy, said, which was horrible regime, torturing people, and like, their prisons were very well known, like legendary, people write books on it, and so on, right? So they claimed that the Palestinians are going to take over Jordan. And actually, Palestinians were not going to take over Jordan. It was the Jordanian movement that was going to overthrow the Jordanian monarchy and have an independent democratic regime for people and so on. So they concocted that the United States had a war room constructed in Washington. Nixon at that time had a war room, and they threatened nuclear intervention if the Jordanian regime fell to the Palestinian and the Jordanian movement. And Israel was supporting Israel from the other side, Jordan, because they had a very big interest in keeping the Jordanian regime in power. So when you keep people say, oh, there's all these Arab countries, how come they don't support the Palestinians? Yeah, the Arab people support the Palestinians, but the leaders are very much connected with the US imperialism with Israel. It is their objective reality. They benefit from the continuation of this. What's your name? Jillian, yeah, go ahead.
Do you feel that there is a way that peace could be met with the enemies?
Yeah, that's not
And
enemies.
what would have to be?
There can be peace only if Islamism is defeated. I mean, I'm saying there, because, and there's for two reasons. There's an immediate, well, you can, if you want to call it violence, you can call it resistance. You can call it, I mean, however you say it. There's two answers to that. The first answer is that immediately nothing can happen. Not even when we talk about the Palestinians, Israel is not interested. Israel is not actually interested in doing anything except take more land and subjugate the Palestinians. In 1982, an Israeli general said the Palestinians need to understand that they are a defeated people. So the only thing is to break the will of the Palestinians, break their very being as humans, right? Israel is not interested. It's not going to go into it. I mean, the Palestinian Authority is going over backward, bending over backward, saying, yes, we will do. And Israel is not interested because Israel can actually take more land, can put more settlements and so on in the immediate term. In long term, it is not in the end. I mean, Palestinians who are refugees want to go back to their homes. Their homes are in Israel, inside Israel. The only way is if you actually have a state for all people. The only way to have something like that is if a state for all people. But Israel thinks that if refugees come back, it will change the Jewish character of Israel. Okay? But why do you want to maintain the Jewish character? People always ask, it's like, so rather than answering on their own terms, let's flip the question around. Why would you want to have a Jewish state? Why wouldn't you have a state for all people? Why wouldn't you want people all to live together, one person, one vote? Everybody supported that solution in South Africa. How come it doesn't apply for Palestine? Why when it comes to Palestine, everything becomes exceptional? We cannot do, this is not for Palestine, this is not why. It works everywhere around the world. Everybody says, we don't want the Euphratic state, we don't want the European. How come this is the only state that people make exception for? It shouldn't be. And it's not really the Euphratic states. It's the interest of the people who are ruling Israel and so on. Is it violence or not? I don't know. I'm here. I'm actually talking politics here, and I'm analyzing. Kind of like my thing is to kind of propose things. But instead of calling it violence, I would ask a question: why is it that the Palestinian kids who continue to be born and people have been, the leadership keeps to be raised, people are broken, we know what happened in Gaza, we know the massacre that happened in Gaza, they keep rising and resisting. Why is that? Because the conditions are just horrible. I mean, you need to go, and I would love for people to go.
I've
Or
just
just
come back from Israel.
from Israel. Where did you go?
I'm sorry.
Where did you go?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This shit was just kind of funny to me.
Yeah. Where did you go?
Sorry.
Where did you go?
That's
Where
it.
did you go? Speak to me. Where did you go? Like which cities, which places did you go? You went to all of Israel? Did you go to the West Bank? Did you go to Palestinian areas?
No.
Did you go on a birthright?
Yes.
Okay, you went on a birthright. Okay.
I
So
couldn't stay because the semester started, but a lot of the people in my group went to West Bank, and we all are keeping in touch because we raised this conversation while we were there, and kind of brought attention to.
and when you say we,
Like as a group.
is this a
Our
Hillel?
our
Is
whole
this a
birth-
Hillel or
no,
a
our
team?
whole
or-
birthright group.
Birthright, okay,
For the
but
Bay
you just
Area.
like basically each one of you went and applied. Do people know what birthright is?
No.
Okay, for people who don't know, basically, it's the Jewish Community Relations Council, right? That's-
Yeah, there's like
And there's a government.
philanthropies and government and taxes paid for people of Jewish heritage in the U.S. to come. The idea is to bring them back to the Holy Land and to learn the culture.
And commit to Israel. Commit to Israel as a project, yeah. So this is birthright. Basically, if you're Jewish, you can just go and like you will get a fully paid trip to go to Israel.
Financed by who?
But philanthropists and taxes and
Oh.
It's not taxes. It's not U.S. taxpayers' money.
No,
It's
not
No,
U.S. Not
yeah.
U.S.
It's Israeli, yes,
Israeli
correct.
expenses.
This is a kind of weird question, but is there a certain amount of percentage you have to have in you that's Jewish?
Excuse me?
How much Jewish do you have to be?
You have to be, you basically.
Like one parent or two parents?
That's a
No, it's if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, according to Jewish law. But it's not, okay, so you can say you're Jewish. The thing is that this is very interesting because there is like at least 1 million Soviets in Israel who are not Jewish. I mean, they imagine when Israel said they want to recruit Soviet Jews and so on, a lot of Soviets who wanted to leave basically said that they were Jewish. And then the records some of the records have been destroyed, some people muffled the records, and they went there, and they had 1 million people. And if you go there and look and answer, everyone knows they're not Jewish. I mean, they will tell you they're not Jewish, but they're living there, and Israel says, well, we have 7 million population, so they can have more people than Palestinians there. Okay. But the birthright, yes, you have to be Jewish. You have to, how do they prove? I don't know, but it's the Jewish Organization of America, the Jewish Community Relations Councils. This is something that is a problem of the Israeli government. It's called Birthright Israel. And there is, by the way, another group that's called Birthright Unplugged, that is by anti-Zionist Jews who are trying to contest that. And there are students like Hillel, there is a Open Hillel and Swarthmore, for instance, that say, we're not accepting this. This is like, we really need to question that. So, Jillian, right?
Yeah.
Jillian is, like you obviously have some questions, otherwise you wouldn't have come here, right?
Yeah, well, because I feel really invested in what's going on over there, and it's just really.
Invested in what way?
invested in both parties and the lives that have been lost.
Why are you investing in your project?
Because I think it's really tragic.
Okay, so on a human level.
Yes.
All right, so that's fair, you know, yeah. So you went there, but you didn't, but the thing is that even when people go to the West Bank, even when they take people to the West Bank, they take them in a very sanitized. And, you know, like we know from politics, because they're all publicized, it's not a secret, it's not a conspiracy. They take them in a very sanitized way to say, like, look, see, the Palestinians are okay, everything is fine. Look, they have the factories, and they have the buildings, and they have so much money, and look, and they have the schools, and look how much money they have, and so on. So it basically camouflages. Like they don't take people, let's say, to areas of Palestinians inside Israel.
That's why we started questioning that, and we started questioning what was going on, and it kind of was just like not answered. And so people who did have the chance to extend their trip and had time went to the West Bank, and we all keep in touch.
So do you know where they were?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'd have to double check just because I'm not familiar with the area, so it's hard to retain that information. But he said that it was an obvious, as soon as you cross the border, the poverty was.
Well, you don't really need to cross the border. You could just go to Lod inside the Palestinian
He just,
area. or
yeah,
Jaffa or
he
Haifa.
also said that it was kind of scary to see like all of the Israeli checkpoints. Yeah. So that was.
Did you see them?
No, I didn't because I had to come back for the semester. But I'm glad that he went because our group was all from the Bay Area, so we were like
So
very.
is he here at San Francisco State or another campus?
No, he lives in Oakland.
So where did they take you then? The next year?
All over Israel, so the Negev, up north.
Did you see the veterans in Yanakot? Did you see the veterans?
Yeah, we went to the better.
Did they show you the 40 unrecognized communities?
What was that?
The 40 unrecognized communities?
We only were able to meet one of the minority groups.
Did you mention Palestinians on birthright to you, or like if they do, like what context was it in? Just curious.
I'm glad that you asked that question. They actually had a historian come in and because we complained that our leader kind of gave a biased talk on this topic, and we kind of all complained about that. And so then they brought in the historian, which I already think was in plan, and he thankfully just gave the facts of the wars that had amounted into what it is now. He didn't give any biased opinion on it. He was an academic, a scholar, so he just gave basically most of the facts that you guys were just sharing with me.
Other questions? Comments?
My question might be a long one to answer, so if you don't want to
Okay,
answer,
but
it's fine.
apologizing.
No, because I feel like everybody's tired. They want to go
No, all
home.
your space. This is your space.
Okay.
This is why students, by the way, are very timid. Office hours are for you. Class time is for you. What's not for you, and I would reject, is I am not customer service and you're not consumer. That's the only thing. Is like, I'm not going to give you the grade because you paid for it. I don't care, you know. But apart from that, of course, we're here for you. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my question is kind of about like the history of Yasser Arafat, kind of. So Yasser Arafat basically started kind of the PLO, right? Am I wrong? Or?
Yeah. He started GUPS actually.
Yeah. Oh, really? I don't know. But and then Yasser Arafat was at a point the leader of Palestine, correct?
Yeah.
So was he part of the Palestinian Authority, or was he?
Yeah. So he, Arafat and a whole bunch of people in the 50s, they actually got together. They were student leaders in Kuwait and at Cairo University. They came together and they formed what became the German Palestine students. It's actually the oldest mass institution of the field. In 1965, there's two things that happened. One is that the Arab League formed something called the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. As an organization, they said this is, like if they do this, then it takes care of the Palestinians don't worry. Like we don't need to worry about them. And they appointed a man named Ahmed Shukairi at the head, who has a picture with Malcolm X. That's if people know who's the man with Malcolm X, Ahmed Shukairi. And at the same time, Palestinians met in Jerusalem in 1965 and they formed something called the Palestinian National Council, which was the Palestinian Parliament in exile. Okay. And just incidentally, because some of you are interested in feminism, that's when the General Union of Palestinian Women was formed. And the General Union of Palestinian Women said that a Palestinian is one whose father or mother is a Palestinian. It's actually one of the oldest Palestinian mass institutions. And so they did this and they elected it and so on. Arafat was involved. And in 1965 also, January 1st, that's when Fatah started. Al-Asif actually, yeah. That's in 1965. Before there were other groups, the resistance group. The Palestinian master narrative says that it's Arab, but it's not. There were before, like from 1948, even actually after, there's a whole bunch of things that if you read the book, The Bab Shams, Gate of the Sun, not just the film, yes, Cooley's book, it's a novel, but if you interview a whole bunch of people, and it actually tells a lot, there's a lot of resistance that's not written. When we talk about the master narrative, there's a whole bunch of that's still that's out there that's to be gathered and put together and so on. Anyway, so in 1967, Israel occupies the West Bank and Gaza and other Arab countries and so on. Palestinians come together and say, okay, we're no longer going to depend on Arab countries. Not that they did before, there were a lot of debates and a lot of discussions, the role of Nasser in particular, because he was the leader of Arab nationalism, and he was part of the non-aligned movement, he was part of the Third World, and so on. Okay, nationalize the Suez Canal. It was huge.
Yeah.
The revolution in Egypt was really huge. So then they say, okay, so what we're going to do, they come together and they take over the PLO. So the PLO is no longer an official organization of the Arab League. Now the PLO becomes actually a Palestinian resistance movement. Yasser Arafat becomes the chairman. Why does Yasser Arafat become the chairman? Because it couldn't be George Habash, the Christian, who becomes the chairman. Right? Not only, no, that's another reason. That's one of the minor reasons at that time, actually. But because Yasser Arafat now has a relationship with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia never ever had an embassy for the PLO, never, always had a Fatah embassy. Because they always said the PLO, this is secular, these leftists, and so on, we don't want them. But also because the Palestinian leftists in the PLO had a relationship with the Saudi opposition resistance group, right? Who never called themselves Saudi. It was always Shibh al-Jazira al-Arabiya, the Arabian Peninsula. Nobody ever acknowledged Saudi. Nobody ever said that except for the regime. So there is a discrepancy now within the Palestinian movement, and like it's a very much more complicated thing that Hani was referring to. That there is a branch of the Palestinian movement that says about the Arab governments that we do not intervene in the internal affairs of Arab countries, and that's Arafat, and company. They're getting support, of course. There is the others that are the leftists, who say we are very much involved with the liberation movements. So historically, for instance, the left has supported the Sahrawi, the Polisario, the Sahrawi people's resistance in the Saudi al-Hamra wal-Dahab, okay, which is colonized by Morocco, and it was colonized by Spain before. But Arafat does not never recognize them. He has a relationship with the Moroccan kingdom, right? So this is very interesting. Algeria supports Polisario, right? So this when all of these alliances, like when you look down to it, it is not really this whole homogenized ideas and so on. So, but the petrodollars, and this is kind of what my argument, not everybody necessarily agrees, but that's my my research and my argument is that the petrodollars that allowed Arafat to stay as a chair of the PLO, because he was getting a lot of support, while the left didn't have, didn't. They have a little bit money of combat that whenever he feels like it. They have a little bit from Algeria, sometimes from Saddam, sometimes, not always, okay, because also Saddam had its own analysis and so on. So they didn't, they had the support of the masses. The masses were in power, the regimes were in power. So, but Arafat had support from the Arab, like the Gulf states, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all the Palestinian well-to-do people and so on. He remained in power because you have the money, you have the power. You have the money, you pay the fires. You have the money, you have more full-time staff people and so on. The other people have nothing, So it was always this kind of like the inequality in terms of resources also reflected itself in terms of inequality of power. And the reason it becomes even more important in the region because also the US intervention and Israel enabled these people to stay in power. So it's kind of like, if you think about that has a lot to do with it. So historically, the Palestinian anti-colonial struggle, it was historically called the Palestinian resistance movement. People did not call it Palestinian national movement. It was Fatah was called the Palestinian national movement. That's its name, right? But it was the Palestinian resistance. Everybody used to say Muqawama. Nobody ever used to say Harakah al-Wataniyya. Nobody used to say we want the state.
Yeah.
Nobody said Palestinian nation, like what the nation? There's Arab nation, there's no Palestinian nation. I mean, like, it's Palestinian people. So there was debate, nation, people. There's like a huge school of thought in that. So, but he stays in the power. And I would also say that I argue, this is not necessarily shared by everyone, but this is my argument, is that in towards the middle of the 70s, the October War happens, right, between Egypt, Syria, and Israel on the other hand, right? There is a shake up of power. Israel, a lot of people fall apart because they didn't anticipate that there was going to be a war and so on. But also Arafat and the people around him start thinking that now maybe they'll be able to be recognized internationally more. They are eyeing the United Nations. That's before the speech of the gun and the olive branch in 1974, November 74, when he says, don't let the gun fall from my hand, just take the olive branch and so on. And at that time also, something happens internationally. The Soviet Union is actually becoming closer to the Palestinians, and China, which has historically armed the Palestinians, is becoming against, gets relationship with Sadat, the Nasser guys. Sadat comes in, starts the open door policy, brings all the multinationals in, and so Egypt nationalism and state nationalism, socialism starts coming.
Yeah.
So Sadat comes in, and with him the privatization starts happening. And Numeri has another coup d'etat in Sudan. China starts supporting Numeri. China starts getting closer to the US with Nixon. That's why people, you really need to think about the international, because if you don't think about, you only think about the region itself, or you only think about what's happening with the Palestinians, it's a very short-sighted analysis. You need to think about that. So now the China is dropping the Palestinians, but China historically has supported the Palestinians and armed them, and the Palestinian leftists are Maoist. Now they start thinking we want to be closer to the Soviet Union because China is abandoning them, and also because they want to be part of the international communist movement. So they start adopting something called the peaceful coexistence, which is a huge debate between the Soviet Union and China about which way international relations should be. Soviet Union is involved in the deterrence of the nuclear Cold War, and China said, I don't want to be part of this, right? But China starts changing. That's kind of like beginning to change at that time. So Palestinians get closer. Palestinian leftists also, at that time, PFLP gets weaker because the DFLP splits. The DFLP bands with Arafat. When they band with Arafat, they start politically getting closer to the Soviet Union. Arafat and his group are getting money from the petrodollars. Things begin to change. The October War happens, they start talking about something called a state on any land that gets liberated. The 10th PNC meeting. When the 10th PNC meeting happens, that's the beginning of what is called the two-state solution. That actually begins there in 1974. Arafat goes to the UN, makes his speech and so on. Things are still okay, but then when they do the 10th, the PNC 10th, the PLO splits. So the leftists, Arafat, Fatah and Habash and go to Iraq, they start something called the Rejections Fund. Fatah and the DFLP are supposed to be the PLO, right? The rejections fund lasts for a very long time until Sadat goes to Jerusalem. When Sadat goes to Jerusalem, recognizes Israel, Palestinians come together in Tripoli in 1978, and they have the unified PNC. And they decide to come together and struggle together on the basis of course, 1967, the Arab League is the three no's in Khartoum, in Sudan, the Arab League conference. No to peace, no to surrender, no to negotiation. The three no's. We very well know that in Khartoum. Now, it's very interesting because if you think about what's happening inside Palestine, okay, so 78, we're having the Lebanese civil war that begins in 1973. 1970, the Palestinians get kicked out of Jordan. Now we're beginning the Lebanese civil war. The same thing that happened in Jordan happens here. The Lebanese right wing start accusing the Palestinians of having to take over, but it was actually the Lebanese national movement that's sick and tired of US intervention and of all this like horrible colonialism and so on that's going on. So they start targeting the Palestinians. So 1978 is when Sharon invades the south of Lebanon and conducts the first Qala massacre. That's what happened. Now, so the Palestinians come together, something is happening inside. In 1974, the National United Front gets formed, which is exactly, there's United Democratic Front in South Africa. People say, why is it? There's a lot of parallels, right? People are building underground grassroots movement. They're coming together. In 1980, the first Palestinian elections happened. 1978, 1976, 1980 is the elections of the mayors that Israel runs, and they're all PLO mayors. So Israel actually is defeated, is unable to have the PhD and so on. So, but it's always pull and push, pull and push, pull and push. And Arafat is always stronger because he has much more resources, right? In 82, when they get kicked out of Beirut and they go, and then Hassan Saddam says, if we keep going further, we're going to be fighting for Palestine from Fiji, right? But then there's like all these things that the massacre happens and so on. What's going to happen? What do the Saudis come with a peace plan? They come up with a plan. Instead of saying the US needs to withdraw, Israel needs to withdraw, they come up with a plan to recognize Israel at the expense of the Palestinians. But Arafat is always the one who has the connections with everybody. The left is getting weaker because they're assassinated, because there is no more fighters. It's not just the left anymore, it's the resistance.
Yeah.
So they become deeper into it again. The one last thing I would say is that, and I think Julian asked about the whole question of violence and resistance, is that there is something building in the West Bank, and quote unquote the first intifada is taking place. Abu Jihad, second in command of Fatah, is supporting people inside. So Israel goes and assassinates. So it's kind of like, like 87, Abu Jihad, Najib Ali, a whole bunch of people. Like, it doesn't stop. It's starting every single day. So Arafat continues, and then he becomes, after the Iraq invades Kuwait, and the PLO refuses to condemn Iraq. They vote abstinence. They abstain, but everybody says they supported Saddam. So all the Arab countries get pissed off. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states and so on. They cut off the government to Arafat. Meanwhile, Hamas is getting stronger. So is he going to be, so, okay, I'm going to stop because too many details for you guys.
I have this all written down in my notebook from Palestine course.
Yeah, right, I know, I can see the look of recognition. But it's, I think that book of Arus is actually quite good until 1978, and then after that you can. And then you who wants the syllabus, like we can, I can share it.
I wanted to add, look, like every struggle, if you look at it, there has always been different forms of resistance. The determining nature of the struggle is actually determined by the oppressor. How brutal, how violent, how much they limit the space of peaceful resolution. Every struggle that I have studied, whether it's the South African struggle, the Palestinian, Puerto Rican struggle, the African continent struggle, generally speaking, all of them have always started by appealing to the powers that be. Listen, we want our democratic rights. And usually, they like Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of the Vietnamese struggle, he actually went to the first conference of the Versailles after World War I. He actually went there and appealed to them, listen, you have to recognize that we want our rights. He appealed to them, he wrote a letter to the, and of course they dismissed it. And the French, of course, completely dismissed it. And subsequently, the Vietnamese found that they had no alternative but to resort to armed struggle, which none of us as human beings desire that to be our first choice of resisting, but we're compelled. It is actually the indigenous people in this country. Many of them went to Washington, D.C. and appealed to the Great Father, as they used to say, to honor the treaties, don't take the land, and honor what you agreed to, and we will not resist, and we will not continue to fight, and we will live in peace. But of course, we know the history that none of that was honored. And you either fought or you didn't fight. They were obviously vanquished. So I always refer to, I don't know if you've ever read, I always refer to the autobiography of Nelson Mandela. And autobiographies are very subjective because the person who writes it or who authors it, they're shaping it depending on how they want to shape it. But I always remember there was one particular line where he showed how the ANC, the African National Congress, led mass resistance and boycotts before the 1961, when they finally said, look, we're being killed, we might as well fight back. And in it he says, listen, it's the oppressor that determines the form of the struggle. It's they who determine whether we respond in a violent fashion, in reaction to violence, or we react in a peaceful fashion. So I think it has a lot of relevance to the Palestinian struggle, because when you look at the Palestinian struggle, the way Professor Abdulhadi was just quickly illuminating, there's been so many changes and shifts and dynamics. One of the really profound impacts to the Palestinians was the Gulf War. That really shifted and brought about the U.S.-Iraq Gulf War, first one especially, and that shifted the political dynamics of the Palestinians and made them orient towards what became known as the Oslo Accords, which basically, as far as I think most people who look at objectively, basically was a surrender. The Palestinian people haven't surrendered, but the political leadership did. So I think that, you know, it's unfortunate. There is...
they killed the ones who did not surrender.
Yeah.
They killed the ones who did not surrender.
And much blood has been spilled, of course. But I agree with Professor Abad that I think the only solution is a one-state solution between the people. I don't think the two-state solution is a false premise and has no validity today.
And even Israel doesn't want it.
And it's just a question. Yes?
Israel doesn't want it.
No, they want a one-state solution, but they want a one-state solution based on getting rid of the indigenous people.
Yeah.
That's the perspective. They do want a one-state solution on the basis of a colonial project. But we're talking about a one-state solution, which would entail everyone's right as citizens, whether they're Arab Christians, Arab Muslims, Israeli Jews, Israeli Jewish descendants from the Arab world, whatever it may be. One vote, one vote, whatever it is. One person, one vote. That requires a decolonial reorientation, getting rid of the colonial history, the colonial relations, and the dominant power that dictates a subordinate relationship to a particular people, in this case, Palestinians. That's why it's a very hard conception to view how we're going to resolve this. But I think the bottom line is, if people can't be having their freedom if they don't have justice. And I think that kind of covers it.
Before